From the News Channel 5 Network, this is Titans Talk.
Hey there, and welcome into Titans Talk, the Week 15 edition of Titans Talk, as the Titans fall yesterday to the New York Jets, 16-11, the first ever 16-11 final score in NFL history. I am Steve Layman. Thanks for joining us tonight on News Channel 5 Plus. We will dive more into that game yesterday. We also want to get your comments and thoughts about the game and really where this season has gone and the direction this team will head in the future as well throughout the course of the night. 737-7767 is the number if you want to chime in on the phone. It was a game where the Titans led it much of the way. It was not pretty at any point in time. It was very much like you might expect when you have two 2-11 teams doing battle. It was just kind of a lackluster, ugly football game in terms of execution. Probably made up for some of that in terms of the excitement that came along with the game, because you had some very interesting plays. You had a melee there on the field in the second half. You nearly had a miraculous finish by the Titans at the very end. So what it lacked in artistic beauty, it made up for in some ways with entertainment value yesterday. And that's been lacking, frankly, recently in a lot of these Titans games that have been such blowouts that there was really no intrigue. No reason to stick around in the second half of the game. Yesterday, you finally had that. Some thoughts about the game. Clearly, Jake Locker, the guy walks around with like a black cloud over his head, seemingly. You just feel bad for him at this point. He comes into the game yesterday after being benched early on in the season because of an injury, and the team clearly moving on from him. Here he is, thrust back into a situation where his offensive line is beat up, and at times he had to run for his life yesterday. But on the play in question, he held on the ball a split second too long with no one available to block an edge rusher on that blitz, and he paid for it. It was a big hit from Quentin Copples. He goes down on his shoulder. He dislocates it. He's out for the season. He was placed on injured reserve today. And you just go back to the same questions about Jake Locker in terms of his durability. Can he stay healthy and play in the National Football League? As there you see him down on the turf. Jake has a skill set that, if he could stay healthy, I think could help an NFL team. He's a great guy and a very good leader in the locker room. But the more and more evidence you get, the more and more you just have to wonder, can he stay healthy enough to really be an impact player in the National Football League? And sadly, the information and the results you've seen over the last couple years, maybe even 3 years in Tennessee, is that he can't. And so once again, he'll miss the final two and a half games of the season because of what is a season-ending injury to Jake Locker. That means Charlie Whitehurst is your quarterback heading into Thursday night's game in Jacksonville. And a short week is the last thing this Titans team needs. They've got 24 guys on injured reserve, and now they've got to turn around in about a 2-day prep and play a football game on the road. It seems like a recipe for disaster, even more so than the last several weeks have been. And I know the Jaguars aren't great. I know they're one of the Titans' 2 victories so far this year. But that's a Jags team that's going to be hungry for a win. It's a Jags team that certainly has no fear in the Titans, even when the Titans have been pretty good or okay in the last few years. The Jaguars have found a way to split those season series. And so they're going to be ready to get a win for the first time in a long time, or I guess second time in a long time, on Thursday night against the Titans. It just doesn't really set up very well for them. The Titans went out and signed Jordan Palmer, the younger brother of Carson Palmer, today to give them something else at that position besides Whitehurst, because it's highly unlikely that Zach Mettenberger will play on Thursday. So it's a situation now where you got 2 games left. Can the Titans win them? And maybe the bigger question, after looking at a lot of tweets, a lot of comments from people yesterday, do Titans fans want them to show up and play well enough to win either of these last 2 games? Because as you sit right now, the Titans are second on the draft board. behind the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And if both teams lose out, that's where they finish. So you've got an opportunity right now, if you lose out, to pick 2 or maybe even have a chance to slide up to that number 1 pick. If you win, you kind of screw all that up. So if you're a Titans fan, are you secretly hoping that your team loses the next couple of weeks? It's a very interesting question. But you talk about it now in the NBA and in the NFL and some of these leagues when you really talk about the draft and what it can mean to your franchise. And now all of a sudden that is the position that the Tennessee Titans are in with 2 games left in the 2014 season. I think if there were some positives yesterday, I think what you saw from Charlie Whitehurst off the bench, again, makes you feel like he's a quality backup in this league. The question is, has Whitehurst shown signs in his time in there this year that maybe he deserves as much of a look moving forward as Zach Mettenberger? It doesn't seem like that's at all in their plans at the moment, but now he's got probably 2 games left to kind of throw something else out there on film. Remember, Mettenberger's gotten a lot of praise from people for the big arm and some of the stats he put up, but he went 0-6 as a starter. He didn't do anything to pull this team in a winning position. And now, look, neither Jake Locker or Charlie Whitehurst starting numbers in terms of wins, losses are good this year. But at some point during the season, both of them won a game for this team. Charlie's got a chance to make it a season sweep of Jacksonville on Thursday night. So I think there certainly is a question about Mettenberger's ability to lead and win football games. So is Charlie Whitehurst in that discussion moving forward? I think that's an interesting question that we probably won't get an answer to until we move into the offseason. And then the other thing I think I liked yesterday, although maybe the greatest example of it was pretty ugly, that brawl in the second half, it's kind of an ugly scene on the field. But I think what you like a little bit is that Titans team yesterday stood up for themselves. On their field, they weren't going to get pushed around. Yes, they lost again. Yes, it's been an ugly season. But they showed a level of pride yesterday, I think, in the second half when that game got physical and the Jets started jawing and pushing and shoving and all that stuff, that those guys showed that, look, you're not going to come in here, you're not going to push my brothers around, we're going to fight back. And I think that showed something that this team hasn't checked out. If you are wondering in this losing streak that they have just sort of thrown everything out the window and said, you know what, this season's over, let's move on to 2015. I think that showed that at least yesterday they were in the moment. And their goal yesterday was to win that football game, to prove their superiority on that day, and that they weren't going to back down from anybody. And ultimately they lost the game, but I think they sent a bit of a message that this team isn't quitting, that they're not quitting on each other, and they're not quitting on Ken Wisenhunt at this point. Again, our phone lines are open, 737-7767. Let's start tonight off with my man Philip. Philip, good evening. You will start us off here on Titans Talk.
All right, let's get right to it. There's word on the streets. A little bird told me that the Titans are selling. I've heard all day long there's a lease on the stadium.
Yep.
Let's look back at history a little bit. I'm old. I'm probably older than you. I'm sure I'm older than you. Was there a lease on the stadium when there was the LA Rams? Was there a lease on the stadium when there was the Baltimore Colts? Was there a lease on the stadium when there was the St. Louis Cardinals? Just to name a few. I'm telling you, and I told you a couple weeks ago, we've got a bunch of millionaires out here, millionaire athletes, and we've got a bunch of millionaire people who buy PSLs. And the millionaires in Nashville, Tennessee, that buy the PSLs ain't coming to watch it if it's below 50 degrees. I don't care if they're winning or losing. If there's a sprinkle in the air, they ain't coming out. And it's showing up. It's hugely. So let's address that just a little bit. The other thing that I would have to say is Mettenberger could be the guy if you have somebody who can draft some real talent to protect him. If you can't do that, Mettenberger ain't going to make it on this team. Mettenberger will make it with another NFL team, but this is dismal beyond dismal. This is worse than the Cowboys 1-15 year. This is atrocious football, unlike anything I've ever seen in my 47 years watching football. And I'll leave you with that.
All right, Philip, we appreciate the call as always. It's been bad. There's no question about it. One thing I will say about this offensive line, it wasn't good early in the season, but they're a shell of themselves now because of injuries of what they even were. You know, you're starting tackles the last couple of weeks that have been in the program, signed on the Titans roster for 3 days, and you're throwing them out there in an NFL game. It's hard to be effective when that's the case. So clearly the circumstances at this point are very dire and just frankly abnormal to what you're ever going to see in the NFL. That's the hand the Titans have been dealt with here late in the season. They do have to look at ways to upgrade this offensive line moving forward because it hasn't worked up to this point. As far as the other statements, in most cases, those leases ran out. They let them run out because they were interested in leaving. The lease here is very, very, very long term, and I don't think there's a way to get out. So I don't think it's a dire situation for the Titans in terms of, as fans, you're worried about this team leaving, because I think it would take some serious negotiations or a big time buyout to make something like that happen. It is a concern about people not showing up, but I think that's a greater product of the people on the field and not necessarily the people that are buying the tickets to go. I think it's the fact that this team isn't very good. If they were good, they were going to show up. Back in the day when the Titans were good, that place was full if it was 30 degrees or if it was a playoff game because it was a good team. If this team gets back in the playoffs, it won't matter what the weather's like. You're going to have people showing up there. But I also will say this, that in the last 5 years or so, attendance around the NFL has gotten much worse. You would be amazed when we go to these places on the road. There's just a handful of stadiums where you walk in and you can't identify lots of empty seats. Now, LP Field's extreme at the moment because the product isn't very good and it hasn't been for a while. But you go to a lot of NFL stadiums and you see empty seats now because the TV deals are so good. It's really nice if you've got a 60-inch TV at home to frankly watch the game from there and be able to monitor the Red Zone channel and your fantasy team and all that stuff that you can't very well do in the stadium. And that is a big issue that the NFL's trying to address to make the game day atmosphere better for its fans in the stadium, but I don't know if they've gotten there yet. And so it's not just a fan problem in Tennessee, although it is a fan problem in Tennessee. So that'll be something that Tommy Smith and this ownership, that'll be something that if there is a new ownership or a sale, which, by the way, is very speculatory at this point, because Tommy Smith has said everything about his plans for the team and plans for keeping the team. But whoever's in charge has to worry about getting fans in that stadium and making it a place that they want to show up to. And that's the bottom line moving forward with this team. I don't think you're looking, even an owner buying it, a new owner, where else are they going to move it? Because you talk about franchises moving. There's two right now that want to go to L.A. really bad for next season, and it looks like the NFL is going to prevent them from moving next year. It's not easy to move a franchise, especially this day and age, because I think they're very wary of public perception and all of that stuff. So St. Louis and Oakland want to be in L.A. next year, but I don't think either one's going to be there from everything I've heard around the league because it's that difficult of a process to do. At some point, one of them probably moves, but then what's that mean for the other one? And so I think if you're suggesting that the Titans could be on their way out in Nashville, I think you're a ways away in terms of the dominoes and the steps that someone would have to go through there. Just throwing out all the information at that point. All right, we got to take a break. Come back. Many more of your phone calls to come. 737-7767 is the number. This is Titans Talk on News Channel 5+.